Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a late night insight video and it is on an Ensar fragrance. And anytime I get to review an Ensar fragrance on the channel, even if it's just from a little sample like this, it is an honor and a joy. And Ensar is one of those artisanal houses that has really kind of changed my trajectory. It's changed my journey, if you will. And we're going to talk a little bit about Homer's and Odysseus and the Odyssey, and we're going to talk a little bit about journey in this fragrance. But this is actually called Homeros SQ, and I would urge all of you, if you are a fan of artisanal fragrances, you probably know about this gentleman's channel. But there's a guy, his name is Brandon. He created a fragrance called Therapeutic Fragrance, or Therapeutic Fragrance, I think is the name of the channel. If you type in Ensar Homeros, interview or something, you'll pull it up. But the reason I mention it is because Brandon had the honor of interviewing Ensar when this first came out in 2020. I believe the original came out in 2020, and this SQ version is the second version, if you will. This is the one you can still buy. The original Homeros was a little bit different from my understanding. That one is no longer available. It's discontinued. This one is still in production, okay? So Homeros SQ sells 15 mils for $350, 30 mils for $599, and 50 mils for $1,000. So this is for the connoisseurs. Obviously, this is not a beginner's fragrance. This is for the folks who want to take that next step and experience the real ouds, which we'll talk about in here. The real musks, which there's 2 or 3 different types of rare musks in here. Real ambergris, these type of ingredients, why you pay the big money. Is it worth it? That's up to you. Price is very subjective. Everyone's pocketbook is different, but it is an expensive fragrance, okay? So you can't get around that. The other thing is, this is an early impression. It's a late night insight video, so I have not run through a full bottle of this or anything like that. So my experience with it is very limited, but I'm just giving you my initial impression on it. So in the interview, though, I will tell you, Ensar made some amazing points. He said that this fragrance was supposed to be, well, first of all, there's a story behind it, which you have to understand. This fragrance came about in 2020 when lockdown happened, quarantine happened. Ensar was basically quarantined away from his workshop, okay? So he was quarantined away from his tools, away from his fragrance, his oils, all of that stuff. So the other thing that he mentioned, I think, is he said he had COVID at the time, so he couldn't smell anyway. He was anosmic to smell at the time. So he needed to rely on other people. It was almost like a forced collaboration, if you will. He needed to rely on other people to create a fragrance from his mind, right? And he talked a little bit about a couple things, but one thing that really stuck with me is he mentioned, almost trying to create from his mind, he mentioned Beethoven creating the Ninth Symphony, his one of his most famous works. And you have to think, a man like Beethoven, being sort of deaf, you would think maybe would have some anger towards that, or maybe even just sadness that he couldn't hear his own beautiful music that he created, right? And even though he said he heard music in his head all day, his own finished music he couldn't hear. He was basically deaf, right? So you would think that he would have some resentment towards that, maybe. But his Ninth Symphony was called Ode to Joy. So that's supposed to kind of capture this almost artistic mindset, and almost the power of will, the willpower to push through no matter what, and to reach your destination, which is basically what Odysseus does in the end. So he says basically that he wanted this fragrance to be fulfilling for the soul. Okay, he wanted it to capture, have this longing. This, how do you create a perfume that captures longing for a loved one and longing for home? Because ultimately, that's what Odysseus does. He wants to return to Ithaca. So this fragrance has notes of things like narcissus. It has blue cypress. It has different types of cypress: blue cypress, hinoki cypress, civet. It has neroli in the top. It has musk motia. It has Georgian rose, orange blossom, osmanthus, and elderflower. So it does have a respectable floral heart in there. The osmanthus, I think, kind of gives off some of those. One of the differences, I think, from the original Homeros to this one that I'm holding now is some of those more edible notes, like raspberry, strawberries, that kind of that kind of thing was taken away, and I think it was replaced with the osmanthus, giving it a little bit of a nectar, nectarine peach like feel, or apricot like feel, whatever you wanted to call it. That's the osmanthus, giving it a little bit of that. And then in the base, you have multiple types of musk: Khmer musk, Tibetan musk, and wild Cambodian oud, Sri Lankan sandalwood, Moroccan agarwood, bourbon vanilla, patchouli musk, tolu balsam, oak moss, tobacco, cacao, and the carrier oil was Mysore 70s from the 1970s. Sorry, Mysore sandalwood from the 1970s. Borneo oud resin, SQ ambergris, and Tonkin musk. Now, where in the hell he got Tonkin musk, I have no idea. It's been extinct forever, but apparently there is real Tonkin musk in here. There is real Tibetan musk, from my understanding. And then there's multiple types of oud, as we discussed, and real Mysore sandalwood and ambergris. So you kind of get where I'm going with this, okay? And one of the things that he mentioned in the interview is that when you think about longing or wanting to return home, one of the things he wanted to do was have some notes in here that are slightly gourmand, but it doesn't smell like a gourmand. But there is some cacao, chocolate type notes in here. There's also that peach nectarine thing from the osmanthus, but I think the fruit food notes have been toned down in this version compared to the original. Okay, so let's get started. So a very interesting backstory. Let me read you the blurb. So here's how Ensar website says. It says that this was the first collaboration of its kind, artisanal perfumery with a quarantine twist. Homeros was born during lockdown because of lockdown. Down in South Antalya, along the coast of the Mediterranean, you see the Greek islands hovering nearby, so close you could probably swim there. I was there since lockdown began, unable to return to my atelier. It's the frustration and longing to capture the scent around me that gave birth to the Odysseus collab. Homeros is a result of my collaboration with artisanal perfume connoisseurs who joined in making the perfume not just possible, but what it now is. Participants had 5 iterations: Ithaca, Zante, Ogiga, Cythera, and Ake, contenders, if you will, to study and work with, and they were my surrogate nose, as Homeros was composed by an anosmic perfumer through the prism of his fellow fragheads' input and feedback. Okay, that's what I was trying to kind of talk a little bit about earlier. When you first set sail, you'd hope the reaction would be unanimous and everyone's preference would align to single out one of the 5 perfumes that made up the Odysseus collab, but that would be too easy. What would be the point? If the collaboration didn't influence the direction of the fragrance to ultimately make it greater, if it didn't create a montage of the refinements from added spices to ambergris, toned down citruses to extra oud, there would be no true collab. Instead of a uniform vote, I received fantastic insights and recommendations. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive and still super constructive. What you have here is the culmination of this journey. My team finally managed to get samples to me and Antilla, along with the new iterations developed during the collab. The compositions ended up making a U-turn, so that in the end, Homeros turned out quite different from any of the 5 Odyssey perfumes. Instead of the 5 iterations, my iterations, Homeros, became ours. Okay, so I guess he basically said, I appreciate all your input, but my iteration is the one that it's going to be, which makes sense. I mean, he is Ensar Oud. It belongs to Andy for his scathing criticism, and Erhard for his uncanny insights and proposals, to Walter, who inspired the inclusion of Papuan's Papuan Oud's petrichor fresh wafts of green incense, and Marcel and his wife, who echoed a thought many shared: some of these top notes are a touch too sweet, that they prefer the darker tenor of Ogiga, even though it smelled a bit like a Japanese temple. Remind me why that's a bad thing. And Eugenie, a great grandson of Homer himself. Homero shows off the expertise not of the perfumer, but of the artisanal collective it is made for. Perfume devotees experienced enough to pick up the tonka bean in Zante and the musk that was in Ithaca and Ithaca only. How nobody got fooled into thinking there's any ambergris. There wasn't, but now there's plenty. And who wondered if it was the apricot that killed the mandarin? It was. Homeros gives you front row seats to a landmark moment in perfume history, an olfactory ode to Odysseus that captures the Antillean air, Ithaca's flowers, its fruits, the dry, salty seaside cool, with stirred up countless ideas to create an iconic Mediterranean perfume that captures this place and this crazy time. Lush with sweet, with the sweet zest of the midday breeze as you drive by groves of mandarin, as wafts of narcissus blow down from the hill. Imagine what iodine would do to local habanero laced with rich zest of elderflowers and musked out jasmine, a much subdued, rugged even opening chord caressed by cypress and osmanthus, enlivened by the creamy sweet scent of castoreum and blackcurrant, all enshrouded in wafts of amber-infused tree balsams, musk-laced cacao, and smooth oody baritone of the Moroccan oud. They say the journey makes the man, and that's certainly been the case with this perfume. Homeros is brought to you by the artisanal perfume community for the artisanal perfume community. There weren't minor tweaks or subtle iterations to the 5 Odysseus perfumes. Instead, Homeros has been revamped, overhauled, and turned into a totally distinct perfume where you'll only smell a distant echo of the Odyssey's tone as you sit down to enjoy the destination's end. Hell of a write-up. All of that being said, I have to say right out of the gate that some Ensars I find amazing, okay? Some Ensars I can almost justify the insane price. Other Ensars, though, I have to say that I would be pissed off if I spent $1,000 on some of the stuff I smell. Chinese exclusive is a great example of that. I was not a fan of Chinese exclusive, and there's been some other Ensars along the way that I'm just like, I can see the idea. I can see where they're going, but if I spent that kind of money, and I'm not a high-powered lawyer making $1 million a year, so me dropping $1,000 is not like some of these guys that, it's for them, it's maybe like dropping $5 at McDonald's or something, right? I'm not in that boat. So for me, I have to be very careful with, and I can't buy any fragrances now anyways, but when I could buy fragrances, or when I can again in the future, I have to be very careful with where I spend my money, right? And so this kind of sits, what's interesting is this sits somewhere in the middle for me, because I completely see the ingredients being worth the high price tag, because the ingredients here smell amazing, okay? The real ambergris, the ouds, the musk, all of that stuff. But the originality is not there. And we'll talk a little bit about why I say that. But so to me, this opens up smelling. If you want an example of what the opening of Homeros SQ smells like to me, if you've ever dipped, okay, and I'm well past the opening now, but if you've ever dipped, so I had a terrible habit in college. When I would get way too drunk, I would want to put one of those pouches in, one of those, skull pouches or whatever. Sometimes they would buy the wintergreen ones. I would never buy it, but if it was there, sometimes I would grab one, right? Terrible habit during my binge drinking days. So if you ever put one of those wintergreen skull or grizzly pouches in, those smokeless tobacco pouches, the dips, just imagine this feeling of this tobacco pouch, but the wintergreen, sort of green, incensey, fresh. They mentioned the Papuan oud having this petrichor-like feel along with green incense. And I think the mixture of the Hinoki oud, the blue cypress, is kind of what accounts for that mentholated, wintergreen, sort of medicinal green forest freshness with the tobacco pouch-like feeling. It's almost like when I smell this in the opening, my mouth is almost watering, because if you ever dipped before, it almost has this like this reaction in your mouth when you put one of those dips in. I hated it. It used to make me throw up all the time, and still I would do it. But this early impression episode, what's interesting is if this episode right now was done last week, this easily could have been in my This Is Not a Top 10 Neroli fragrance video that I did. So you can go check that out if you want to learn more about the note of neroli. But there is this ultra green neroli that just adds this sort of touch of freshness. And so the flowers here are not some big indolic, flowing grandma smelling jasmine or anything like that. The flowers here are relatively fresh, but they've mixed it with a touch of civet. And the civet, and I do say a touch of civet, you don't get a huge civet hit, but it does make the fragrance feel like an artisanal fragrance in the opening. It really makes it feel like you're smelling something in this category, okay? And at about the 20 to 30 minute mark, I think, is where you really start to notice this fragrance starts to kind of turn and slowly shift in its journey. to this Ensar DNA. And if you've watched some of my previous Ensar videos, you probably know exactly what I mean by that. But Ensar has this almost patented, sparkly, shimmery, ambergris-like smell, which it feels like so sparkly and alive, you know. And it's almost like, imagine light reflecting off of really good china or something like that, you know, like a crystal champagne glass, and just imagine twisting it and seeing the light kind of reflect off, or diamonds, or you know, whatever your reflection could be. But just imagine all of these different sparkly reflections hitting your eyes. And that's kind of what the ambergris feels like in many of his fragrances. It's sparkly, shimmery, and it just has this sort of Ensar. I call it like this Ensar freshness, this Ensar ambergris, sort of patented ambergris, fresh, sparkly DNA. You smell it in a lot of his fragrances that I've smelled. Not all of them, but a lot of them have it. And this one absolutely has it. But what makes it unique is mixing with all of those cypresses, medicinal green, foresty notes, and then that, imagine the wintergreen skull like dip. Okay, that's a little bit of the opening. And the fragrance does turn leathery very quickly, actually. 30 minutes to an hour in, you pick up a lot of leather, which I love. I love leather in a fragrance. There's definitely some sort of castoreum leather combination in here, and it does turn leathery. It definitely gives off that traditional Ensar DNA that I love so much. Like I said earlier, it's good and it's bad, because it can be, I guess, bad because for me, if you've ever smelled Ensar EO number one, which is my favorite, I instantly gravitated to this. Um, and once I got into the Ensars, I was like, EO number one is mine, because it's a take on leather, and it's so good. I love wearing this stuff. Now every time I smell it, I want to wear it. I want to wear this tomorrow, but you can just see the color of the juice is dark, 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 and I was able to secure actually a second bottle. So if it doesn't look like I've worn this, there's another one that I've worn more of. But man, I love this stuff so much. But the downside is, and like I said, when you spend $1,000 on 50 mils, let's say, you expect to smell something that you've never smelled before. You expect originality, which this, I hate to say it doesn't have, because it's not EO number one. EO number one goes in its own direction. This also kind of goes in its own direction, but in broad strokes, there is huge similarities between the two. Okay, it smells like you smell that Ensar DNA, right? So the good thing, for the money, you get amazing ingredients, amazing ingredients. Um, and you know, but if you know his early work, the originality just isn't there. Now there's three types of oud in here. There's Borneo oud, there's Cambodian oud, and there's Papuan oud. Okay, and along with that, the brand says there's real Tibetan musk and real Tonkin musk, which, like I said, I have no clue where he got it, but it's absolutely beautiful. So obviously, it isn't the same details. I think I heard Peter from Fragrance Review say something like, if you take EO1, which I have here, and mix it with EO2, which I've reviewed on the channel, EO2 uses a lot more musk. And I see where he's going with that, because EO2 is much more musk heavy, and this Homeros has that musk feel. So if you took EO1 and mixed it with EO2, that's a broad stroke of Homeros, and I could completely see that. But if you paint in these broad strokes, Ensar's fingerprints are all over this. Okay, so if you like EO1, I'd love a bottle of EO2. I'd love a bottle of EO2, EO3, EO4. I've never even smelled 3 or 4, and I'd still love bottles of them. If they're anything like 1 and 2, I'm sure that they're amazing. But um, so what ends up happening is so if I were to sort of blind smell this, okay, so if you blindfolded me, and like I did yesterday, if you didn't watch my blind sniff part 7 live stream that I did yesterday, go check it out. It was a lot of fun. My scent of the day is because of that live stream. It was Serge Luton's Queer Moresque. There's enough in here for me to wear as my scent of the day. It is absolutely phenomenal. There's no way I won't get a bottle of this one day. No way. It is. I was blown away by Queer Moresque. But if you blindfolded me, and you can tell I'm a leather lover, right? So if you blindfolded me and put Homeros SQ under my nose, I bet you by half an hour or an hour, I would say this is an Ensar. I bet you I could pick this out, because the musks and the way that the ambergris and the ouds are blended really gives this Ensar DNA. It really, really does. Now, there are some differences. So the different types of musk and there was an elderflower note if you were paying attention, and it almost adds this tart, strange sort of floral mustiness. Um, Not necessarily mothball in feel, but there is a definite musty tartness to it, and it mixes with this sort of balsamic smelling tobacco as the fragrance continues to dry down. And I mentioned that chocolatey cacao begins to come in, and the balsams and the resins and all of this stuff, and the tobacco in the base. And I know I mentioned tobacco in the top with that almost like dip like feeling, but the tobacco is really in the base. And I think this is the type of perfume that sort of tells like half a story, right? So if you smell this first and you've never smelled some of the work that made Ensar, I think you may or may not appreciate the details of the backstory. And I think it depends on really where you are in your journey. This fragrance is all talking about journey and, longing and all of this good stuff, right? But it's so someone reached out to me and they sent me an email and they said, hey man, I'm new to the fragrance game, but I started to really love oud, and then I watched your video and you bashed my Parfum de Marly's oud fragrance I really liked, and then I thought, man, maybe I really don't know anything. Where do I go? And so it really depends on where you are in your journey. If you're somebody who is just getting into, let's say, if Tom Ford oud wood is new to you, this is going to be very challenging and hard for you to understand. Okay, this is kind of one of those things you have to work up to. It's like I left a comment on my channel responding to someone on my Jaseta video, which has gotten a lot of negative and positive feedback because I bashed the shit out of that Jaseta fragrance, and it deserves it. It's absolute shite. But I was telling the person, it's like trying to go fight the boss as soon as you start playing the game, right? You have to build your character up, right? You can't just go fight the final boss immediately. And so this is kind of one of those where it depends on where you are in your journey, whether you're going to appreciate the details, the backstory, the intricacies of this fragrance. And it's like, with the Odyssey, for example, the Odyssey starts in the middle of the tale, not at the beginning. It starts in the middle. And so to Omeros, what's interesting is the way that the fragrance kind of progresses is some of the notes feel like as you're literally smelling some of the ingredients that I mentioned, notes just sort of slide right under your nose, literally as you're sniffing them. It smells like something just comes along and all of a sudden there's like a shift and you smell something different. It's really, really good. Really good stuff. Does Ensar let the materials do the talking for him? I mean, some people say that like it's a bad thing, but sometimes I would say sure. I think he does. Um, Imagine you're smelling real Mysore sandalwood, right? Or imagine you're smelling real oud or real ambergris. And then think about all of these perfumers who go to school for decades, who practice perfumery for decades, learning to try to imitate the real ingredients that you're smelling here in a fragrance like Omeros, and they're trying to imitate it using cheap chemical compounds from IFF and Maine and Simrise and all of this stuff, Givaudan, and the big oil houses. They're trying to imitate exactly what you're smelling with cheap chemical compounds, synthetic compounds, right? So I think one of the reasons why I've kind of fallen in love with artisanal perfume is that I could give you the broad strokes, but the reality is this just feels like it has everything, but at different parts and different points in the fragrance. So it has the floral parts we mentioned. We mentioned the neroli. We mentioned the Georgian rose, the orange blossom, the osmanthus, the elderflowers, all florals, but kind of a unique floral heart. It's not the traditional French bouquet, right? There's the green part. There's the different aspects of green. There's the oak moss. There's the different types of cypress that give it that weird kind of winter green opening, if you will. There's green incense that kind of comes and goes. And there is the balsamic parts. So there's tolu balsam. There's the gourmand parts. There's the cacao, the chocolate. I mentioned some of the gourmand's elements are toned down, but some are still in here. There's the oud part. The oud in here is amazing. I wish the oud was even a little bit stronger, which I feel like I always say that, but there's 3 different types of oud. It's definitely prominent. I always just want more oud, more real musk, more real ambergris, right? But the animalic parts are here. I mentioned the civet. The oud turns slightly castoreum like, maybe even into the dry down leathery. It turns leathery. There's the smoky part, the incensey part. There's the musk part, which again, we talked about all the rare different types of musk used. And the musk is slightly sweetened, slightly powdery. The musk itself can feel slightly chalky at times, or chocolatey at times. And just imagine mixing the chocolatey, beautiful, high-end musk with the cacao, the cacao pods, and it's just brilliant. So you get my point. All these different parts make up the journey, and I just can't imagine a perfumer with a modern perfumer's palette. Okay, I can't imagine a perfumer creating something with this much sort of passion and spirit. This fragrance feels like it has gusto, like it has spirit, like it's driven by something deep inside of it is driving this fragrance. Like the fragrance has a soul, you know, and everything nowadays feels lifeless. It feels like you're smelling it feels like you're just smelling chemical sludge sometimes. Now, not every fragrance is lifeless. That's not fair. The problem is in the old days, it felt like you had to go through 100 fragrances a year, and there were one or two or three amazing fragrances. Now it feels like you have to go through 1,000 fragrances a year, and there's one or two or three good ones, right? And so it just feels like nowadays there's so much lifeless sludge out there. And this, like I said, feels very passionate, and the ingredients around it feel like you're smelling the earth around Odysseus as he struggles to sort of save his men here or there, or the emotion of sort of not seeing his wife or family's face for 20 years. You know, imagine a man going through a journey like that, and then imagine the man becoming strong because of the journey and the longing and all the stuff, and still having the happiness to title something "Ode to Joy" when they're deaf or blind or whatever it is, right? And this highlights that sort of sense of journey beautifully. It's a beautiful composition that I really think that the hardcore frag heads will love, especially if you love Ensar's other works. If you love the EO1, EO2 line, if you're familiar with Ensar's journey and how he kind of got here, Homeros SQ is one that I wish it didn't take me until 2024 to discover and discuss. But I'm glad I get to talk about it on the channel. I really, really like it. This is definitely one I would have a full bottle of if money was no issue. But you know how that goes. So yes, very lucky to get to try it. Thank you to my perfume god person who sent this along. And I'll save my last drop or two for a rainy day one day when I need a little mental pick-me-up. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. It is a powerful fragrance. And a very interesting backstory. We always talk about, you know, the same mundane, boring, same old, same old. This is a fragrance that at least has a very interesting backstory, and the ingredients and the way everything's blended will blow you away. So yes, bravo. Again, I don't rate fragrances, but this is a bravo. Well done by Ensar. Is it worth the money? Again, that's subjective, but if I had $1,000 burning a hole in my pocket, this is one I could definitely see myself going for one day. And it's so wearable. It's the same. The problem, like I said, good and bad, because I already have a fragrance that I feel covers the bases that Homeros covers. So I think I'd rather have EO2. If you allowed me to pick, I think I'd rather have EO number 2. But this covers the bases in a similar way where I feel like with EO number 1, like I could wear this to work, signature scent, no problem. The way it blends, it's so classy and different and all that stuff. And it checks a lot of the same boxes, but it still is moving, and the materials are still some of the best I've smelled. So my vote is a thumbs up. I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave it in the comments as always. Thank you to my perfume god person who made this possible. I wouldn't be able to do this even without, you know, whatever this was, a quarter of a mil or whatever the hell was in here, something very small. I wouldn't be able to do this without you, so thank you very much to those who have sent me stuff so I can get my nose on stuff that I never would be able to otherwise. And now when I do my This Is Not a Top 10 Orange Blossom fragrance video, which I'm working on, we'll be able to include Homeros SQ. So let me know what your thoughts are. As always, cheers guys, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.